And we are live, Rad Ray, Dr. Energy Week podcast. It is the last one of May, right? This is the last one of May. Is that right?
I
We got one
think.
more.
Well, next Monday is Memorial Day, and
Yeah,
that's May 31st. So
May
we could
31st.
squeeze in another if we are decide to do a Memorial Day edition.
If we're really hard workers.
Yeah.
1 second. I got a text I have to respond to, and then we'll get into the show.
Meanwhile, I can discuss while Ryan's replying to his text. We can discuss the fact that Room Rater has given me a very poor rating for my background, and so I think I will be undertaking a redecoration of my background. On this show, it actually looks fine because my printer that's in the corner is cut out, but I received bad marks for the printer and for multiple author copies of my book.
You can never have enough author copies.
That's what I was thinking.
I mean, that's, you did the work. I remember when you were working on that. Text. I can't remember what it was that you were, if it was we had a show coming up or you had to send me something and you're like, I'm sorry, the publisher just asked for the index. And so you had to go read the index. You were AWOL for
yeah, I would like to say that I was the best author. Like you would do, when you sign a contract for a book, you have a date by which you have to turn in the draft. And I turned mine in early. I would like that said. I turned turned in early. Okay. And then they do their edits and then I would get through everything. It's like past pages. You've got to read everything 10 zillion times. And then they send me this index. And I'm sorry, but the index was like a flaming pile of it was so bad. Now, to be fair, my book has a lot of names that are actually in another language. And if you're not familiar with that language, it can be hard to understand who's actually the same person. And also a lot of people have the same names. So I'll give them that. But and they're like, well, we need it tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And I think I was teaching at the time. And I used to teach at night, so I didn't come home until 9:00 at night or something. Mm-hmm. I was like, I'm sorry, that's just not happening. I'm like, I need 2 days, and I literally had to go through and do the index, redo the whole index. Oh my god, yeah, that was the one where I was like, I've met every single deadline, but you're gonna have to give me 2 days on this. So yeah, I remember that
deadline. There's I think a self-imposed deadline on the show now to mention Big Oren. I've noticed it on Twitter. He's been listening to the show, noticing we've been talking about him, and we know that his ego is Donald Trump-esque. So if we don't give Big Oren his weekly shout out by this point in the show, he will probably get frustrated. So Big Oren, hats off to you.
Spanish whatever you've done, whatever you've said, I'm sure it's amazing.
It's yes. So we will call him he's actually, I think, Scottish. So the Scottish, he lives in Spain, Spanish Donald Trump. So we'll call him
I thought he was Welsh.
Welsh.
I thought we had this discussion.
I
impressed him with my knowledge of Welsh places because it turns out that where I grew up was named out. They're all Welsh places like Bryn Mawr and Ballackinwood, and I know to spell things with Y's.
Donald Trump. We'll call him the EU Donald Trump. So
okay, yeah.
He's close enough. I don't know if his hair is as good as Trump or not, but everything else is pretty much if you were to swap their Twitters on a daily basis, you wouldn't be able to tell who's who, right?
Yeah, if only Trump was still on Twitter.
Trump's on Twitter. Agreed. Okay. Speaking of the EU, we have a report from the Eurocontrol Comprehensive Assessment talking about COVID-19 impact on European aviation. This is a pretty lengthy, looks like a slideshow potentially, but a couple things stood out to me, Ellen, which was one is that traffic flow on May 19th of this year, this is intra-European traffic flow, was down 63% compared to 2019.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. And then the other thing is that the fuel price for May 14th of 2021 was up 174 cents per gallon compared to 167 cents a gallon on April 30th. So you have this weird thing, which is compared to 2019, flights are down. And now we're starting to see gas prices or jet fuel prices that are rising. And I don't see this comparison to what the gas fuel was, maybe the jet fuel was in 2019, but I would suspect that jet fuel prices are actually higher in 2021 than they were in 2019, or about the same. And so you have less flights with higher expenses, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely an interesting. So you really can't go by like how much money people are spending on jet fuel because the price is now so much. I think it's higher. One of the things that I was really interested in, give a hat tip to on Twitter. His name is Mr. Commodity for sending me this because I thought it was really interesting. Is the if you look at what's going on with inter-European travel, I mean, I understand, like, yes, a lot of people may opt to take trains or not, or there is train as an option in a way that, say, it's not necessarily in the US, but I think it definitely shows like what some of the issues and the hurdles are, I think, in terms of getting over the oil demand issue, and jet fuel is still a really huge component of that. I wonder, I know that when we've spoken to Dr. Foreman, he said that refineries in the US kind of shifted to making less jet fuel per barrel of oil, but I'm wondering what was going on in Rotterdam, like what's going on in the European refineries. Big Oren knows the answer, but because he seems very cued into that. But have there been similar adjustments like we saw in the United States in terms of making jet fuel? And even if we don't see oil prices going down, which I don't think we're likely to see oil prices going down, could jet fuel prices come down if there's a shift back to actually making more jet fuel?
Yeah, well, the thing that's I think is curious is when you look at, let's see, your so here's another stat. The main traffic flow is intra-Europe flow with 9,782 flights on May 19th, which is increasing 16% over 2 weeks. And then the intra-Europe flights are 63% down to 2019, while intercontinental flows are at minus 57%. So everything's down. And if you look at, they have a nice little, I sent this out on page 14, kind of showing where the flights are down. And so if you look at it, they're down 36% to what they're calling Southern Africa, so sub-Saharan, 47% to the Middle East, 65% to Northern Africa, 63% to the South Atlantic, which would be South America. I mean, you kind of go through this, and but other Europe, so they have Europe, which is the ECAC, and then the other Europe, which is not
the other Europe,
is down 75% to just right there. And those would be some of the cheapest flights. So I would think, though, that has to be lockdown driven more than potentially fear of flying and catching COVID driven, right?
Yeah, that would definitely seem like what it's saying to me. Although I wonder now with that recent flight that was, what was it, the Ryanair flight that was diverted so they claimed there was like a bomb threat, but really they diverted it so they could arrest a journalist. I mean, how is that going to even affect? Like, are people going to be like, oh, you can't trust this? Like, do you really want to get on a flight with me? Oh, there's a fake bomb threat, but really we just want to arrest a journalist.
Yeah, it's definitely a problem. It's definitely a problem, and I need to look into this. Last time I looked, the flight I used to take to South Africa, I couldn't find it anymore. So I'm curious how much that's going to impact. As you start getting back to traveling internationally, you kind of had I used to fly from Atlanta to Johannesburg. One shot. It's a long flight, but it's one stop. I fly to Atlanta, and then boom, there. Now I think I got to go through Europe, which adds a lot to it, and so yeah.
Oh yeah,
bigger pain.
And I do think that there's definitely this okay, so how many people aren't flying because it's inconvenient, like they can get to flights they want. Like I've got this issue too. Living in Jacksonville, you can't, it's hard to get somewhere in one shot. You got to get to another place, and if there's no flights, then do I really want to spend 10 hours in an airport? So there's this issue of like availability and have people like, well, I'm not going to go because it's just super inconvenient but I would go if it wasn't inconvenient. So when is that sweet spot where where there's demand for the flights and they're adding them back in, and then people are like, okay, it's more convenient now, so I'm actually going to do it. I mean, my guess is like the airlines have some sort of like operations research people whose job it is to figure out when exactly you want to, add routes. But, I definitely think that that's an issue. I also think that I wonder if it says something about whether like these like vaccine passports that they keep talking about in Europe are they actually going to happen? They keep saying they're coming. Is that going to spur travel, or is it just going to be like, then another thing that we have to deal with?
The other thing to consider here is okay. So if I were to fly again from either Dallas or I live in Louisiana, direct flight to Atlanta, and then Atlanta to Johannesburg, I knew that flight would leave at 8 p.m. Atlanta time and get there 5 p.m. the following day, Johannesburg time. And I would leave 8 p.m. Johannesburg time and get home like 11 a.m. Dallas time or Monroe time. So if I had to fly through Europe and I didn't, it would add 30 hours to my trip. So a 10-hour or 15-hour delay getting there and 10 to 15 hours getting back, right? So those 30 hours, either I had to shorten I never did it, but I would have to shorten my trip potentially because that's 30 hours I'm gone. That's just 30 hours lost day. So do you shorten your trip, or do you, how do you account for that? And so that impacts demand in kind of different ways, right? Because now you're talking about, are you staying in country? Are you doing other stuff? And so some of these little things, we don't think of them as a big contributing factor. But you start stacking all that stuff up, you can see not jet fuel demand in this case, but other demand popping up in other areas because people were having to change how they travel because longer layovers, longer times in airports. They may travel shorter periods of time, which would impact demand somewhere else. So I think we got a lot of that has to be kind of sorted out still.
Yeah, it's interesting to also see where things are coming back fastest. So the highest increase, they said, was at Istanbul. Istanbul airport saw 132% increase, mainly due to Vueling and Ryanair. I've never even heard of Vueling as well as domestic flows. So it's probably not the airport that I would have thought, but Istanbul is a really big meeting between basically Asia, Middle East, and Europe. I mean, I've flown through there to get to Europe. It's basically so it's not surprising, but I guess it kind of is surprising, but it's interesting. And the other Istanbul airport is also due to other. So it's I don't know. I think it's interesting to see which airports are seeing the most travel. I wonder actually if you would see. Oh, and so this is interesting because they look at this with vaccination rates. And it's interesting to see that. Let's see, what does Turkey have? Turkey is not exactly up there in vaccination rates, and I think that I don't think that we're going to see I think there's been a lot of talk that vaccinations are going up. That's going to correlate somehow to increased economic activity, increased travel. And I'm not sure that that's actually the case, unless people are actively prohibited from traveling. If they don't have a vaccine, I'm not sure that we're going to really see that correlation. I don't think we're seeing it here. I mean, Israel has the highest vaccination rate along with Malta, Monaco, and the UK, and their airports are not listed as particularly high sites of travel.
Okay. Right. And so that kind of ties into our next piece, which is about are vaccinated Americans powering the economy? And to that question, that's kind of an interesting thought experiment, right? Because we talked about demand resuming in the summer, and part of this is going to be whether or not Americans are, if they're vaccinated, are they going to go places, or are the ones that are not? How are you going to make this determination? And so I'm not really sure. It doesn't surprise me to say that the data is not. The data is kind of unclear, but also, how many people are lying about getting vaccinated?
I don't know. I hope a lot of people. I don't know. I think there's been this idea, and you see it repeated constantly amongst. I don't want to say elites, but just like people who are talking on TV, or I've seen people being like, vaccination rates are going up. This is good for oil demand. This means that demand, economic activity is coming back this summer. And I think that that's something that they felt personally. And I think there's a lot of people believe that everybody else feels about COVID the way that they feel. I think like the amount of psychology in this is, I think, so much more than the amount of economics. It's like, I wish like, I'm sure we've talked about him before, but Daniel Kahneman, who is a cognitive psychologist at Princeton, and he wrote this book basically looking at like the psychology of economics, or it was called Thinking Fast and Slow, but he looked at some point at traders and people who are money managers and fund managers and how they make decisions and the psychology of this. He actually won the Nobel Prize in economics. And I feel like this is coming so much into play, and it's almost like the psychology of it is more important, because people who are saying like, oh, when the vaccine, then people will do X. And I think that's more of a reflection of what they personally feel comfortable doing, as opposed to what everybody else in America is thinking. And it just seems like there are so many people who are still scared. And even though they get, and a lot of those people were the first ones rushing out to get vaccines, and they are not necessarily fueling some like major economic boom. They're not going out there and being like, yay, I've been like let out of the cage, I'm free. And I think that says a lot about the nature of fear. And I actually, I wrote about this actually almost exactly a year ago, believe it or not, in Barron's. And I said then that, I think that that's not the title of the article, but if you look it up on Google, it gives you this headline: oil demand won't recover until people feel safe. And then the real title was something like, the oil recovery will be complicated. Here are the 3 stages to expect. Won't return until consumers feel safe. And so I said that, you've got to get over, there's a lot, you have to get over the virus itself. You've got to get over the fear of it. And then you've got the economic devastation that comes from it. And so, we're looking at, and I think that people thought that the vaccines were the thing that would get rid of the fear. And I think that at least this Wall Street Journal article is saying that it's more complicated than that, that maybe for a few people it gets them over it, but it seems like that fear is a lot deeper. And I think that that's something that we really need to reckon with.
Well, I wrote about this in the War Room newsletter when I went on that trip last year. I went to these cities and I was asking people, do you think the vaccine is going to fix the economic problems? And none of them were like, oh yeah, we think that's the problem. We think that's the solution. They're like, not really sure. And so I think the next milestone is that the Washington Nationals, I think, are going to full capacity here in a few weeks. And when they do, that will kind of be something to observe. So will you have all these people from DC showing up who have lived closest to the epicenter of propaganda, if you will, for a year? Will they be there? And if so, will you have Fauci throw out a first pitch? Kind of got the George W. Bush landing on the aircraft carrier scene. Will he be there throwing out the first pitch without a mask on? Because the symbolism of some of this stuff, that's kind of, more than anything else. So I think that's maybe the next milestone to see how it plays out.
Oh yeah, I love that idea, like the symbolism of it. However, I would remind people, if you are going to be gauging the attendance at the Washington Nationals games as some sort of indication, that a lot of people from the entire Atlantic region travel. I know lots of Phillies fans who go down to DC to watch Phillies Nationals games because it's, I don't know, too expensive, too inconvenient, whatever. They don't want to do it in Philadelphia. So I would also watch to see how many of the fans are actually rooting for the Nationals as opposed to the opposing team before you make your decision about whether Washington Newtonians, whatever, have overcome their fear. Could be, some other issue.
Okay, Dr. Walt, I sent you a note if you could check that, por favor.
Oh, yeah.
If you go on to this next thing here. Oil to stay below 70 a barrel if Iran sanctions lifted, according to Indian refinery. So we were talking about this morning on the Textual Guest podcast, and we're sitting here, Iranian oil, where will it be? How will it work? Are the sanctions going to be lifted first? Is that kind of the read in the room?
So hopefully my mic is working now.
Yes, much better.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Mic problems. So I think first of all, I'm not at all confident that we're going to see the sanctions lifted this summer. Every piece of news is this first one way, then the next one, the next, back and forth. So I'm not holding my breath on this, but I think it's interesting because I think there's a perception of what's happening, and then there's the actual oil market reality. I think we have to deal with a couple things. The first is that Iran has been selling a lot more oil than than is officially recorded. And we all know that it's been between, it's as much as like 1 million barrels a day more. So you have to reckon with the fact that there's more Iranian oil on the market. It's being sold clandestinely. It's there. Iran also has oil in storage that it's ready to let out. So Iran has set its targets for both its post-sanctions oil production and oil exports. The question is it going to say take all that oil that it's selling underhandedly to China and now say, well, it's out in the open and you got to pay more for it, which could actually serve to raise the price because the oil's there. It's the same oil that's on the market now. They just want to charge more for it because it doesn't have to be hidden. And that's totally a possibility. But then you on top of so that's why I've actually argued that ending the sanctions could actually lead to an increase in the price of oil, but there's a perception that oil isn't on the market, which could the market could drop the price even when even when what's actually on it doesn't. So there's that issue, but then there's also this issue of stored oil and how much are they of that and condensates are they going to dump on the market when it happens, because that could lead to a price drop. Now, India wants to buy Iranian oil. They really cut a lot of their orders of Iranian oil to comply with sanctions. They bought more from the Saudis. Now they're not so happy with the Saudis. So I'm sure they would very much love to start buying Iranian oil. Especially they would really like for oil. It says they expect oil prices to ease and stable at $70 a barrel. That's also what they want. So they're like, we think this is going to happen, but remember, it's also what they want to happen because they don't like how oil prices have been heading towards 70. But they're not the only ones with a thought. So it's kind of interesting to see how everyone's trying to like get out in front of the Iran oil story, as if controlling the narrative will effectively determine the price.
And what's the latest Biden stance on this statement on this?
Iran what?
Yeah,
sorry, that was mean.
No, I mean seriously, what is the? I mean, I know there was talks of a meeting a week or two ago, but maybe I missed it. I haven't seen. Is there been actual official trade talks or negotiations that I missed?
I mean, there have been these like ongoing talks in Vienna that have to do with like, are they staying in this International Atomic Energy Agreement thing? And there have been statements from the Secretary of State that have to do with like, oh yes, we want to lift all these sanctions, and then kind of backtracking. No, they're not being lifted. It's really, I think that they had a deadline right around now that they wanted to hit that they have exceeded. I also think that the American side, they tell the media one thing, and then the Iranians tell their people something else. We thankfully have people who are, kind of conveying what's in the Iranian media to everyone else, so we can see both sides. But it's important to understand that like what's being fed to both sides is different, and so that's why I say like, we're close to an agreement, and suddenly people are like, oh, that means the sanctions are lifted. I'm really not I'm not as enthusiastic about this, I think, as some of the people, at least in social media, are.
So how will
especially by the way, because Iran is gearing up for presidential elections, and their election season is very short and condensed and intense.
Oh, they're smarter than us.
Yeah, in that way.
So, how will this impact the Iranian-China deal if the sanctions are lifted? Will that just make it easier for China to buy the Iranian products? Will they increase their, I mean, because we talked before that Iran's having to sell to China at a discount. So if they have to sell to, now they can sell to them at full market price, or was the price locked in? Do you have any read on that?
Yeah, I think that's a really well. It's hard to tell how much they're selling. You have to assume they're selling at a discount because of all of the shenanigans they have to go through. And then there's like they publish official prices, but is that really what the prices are? Who's paying for what? For a while they had this thing where they were like buy it all at once or something. It's really hard to say exactly what they're making. I mean, they may not even be charging dollars. So they may be getting yuan.
Oh yeah, right.
God knows what. So it's, I think that China's going to continue to want to buy Iranian oil both above board and possibly keep going with some of the more clandestine deals just to get better prices. And I also think that it could also, I mean, what you got to add in OPEC there. What's OPEC going to do? OPEC's going to want to say, Iran's going to say to OPEC, well, we had all these sanctions, so we want exemption. We want to sell this amount of oil, before we comply with your deal. And OPEC's going to have to deal with that. And the last time OPEC had to deal with that, remember, the Russians had to get the Saudis in a room and separately.
Sorry, the
sorry,
autoplaying.
The Russians had to deal with the Saudis in one room and then the Iranians separately to get a deal. So OPEC could become significantly more complicated.
Okay, and let's talk real quick on this. You touched on this a second ago, but Goldman is saying $80 oil by the fourth quarter of this year. God, it would seem to me that if you're OPEC, like you're going to do everything in your power to prevent that from happening, right?
Yeah, but also isn't Goldman is like married to this $80 oil at all costs. It's like every time something, they're like, no, $80 oil, it's coming. Right. Remember before they were H2, now they're Q4. And look, the case for high oil prices therefore remains intact, given the large vaccine-driven increase in demand in the face of inelastic supply. I would parse that and say, is there really large vaccine-driven increase in demand?
Well, the other thing is
there may be a large increase, but is it vaccine driven? And I'm not convinced that that's correct.
I've heard some people, and it's kind of going to the wayside now. I know our friend Mark Rosano was taking a victory lap on Twitter the other day with some of the inflation numbers came out. But for a while that was kind of being mocked that inflation's here, and it's not really here, and it's not that bad. But okay, if oil prices do hit 80, gasoline prices are going to go up. Price of milk's going to go up. All this other stuff's going to go up, right? The economy, I'm sorry, it's not strong enough to continue to withstand increased prices. And so at some point, something has to give. Now, I don't know, and so I'm not saying it's going to be a demand destruction like we saw last year to reach the prices, but you would think that at some point that the demand will have to level off if prices continue to climb, A, and then B, if oil gets to 80, that has to be the green light for the U.S. shale producers, right? And so if you get to $80 oil, which means that you could have a drill back to sub 50 prices. So I would just think if you're OPEC, like you were sitting there going, okay, we are in a good spot today. Let's do everything in our power. Don't get over 70. Keep everyone at bay. But I don't know. It seems pretty. I'm not saying that they might not have enough production to put online, but it just seems, God, you have to do what you want. You had to think that that's what they're trying to do.
And at a certain point, the shale companies are going to be done paying down their debt. Like they're going to have paid enough debt to be able to say, like, what else are we going to do but expand? Now, assuming they can do that under the current regulatory framework, which is basically up in the air, it's questionable. But yeah, I mean, OPEC, this is a sweet spot. OPEC seems to have gotten control. Like they've got it by the balance beam. I was watching gymnastics. Yeah. It's like they've got it by the balance beam if they move too far. But say come Q4 and it does get up that high, then you've got companies saying, hey, well, I paid out. I've got to look at my balance sheet. It's fantastic. I can sit here. I can buy back my stock, or I can expand. And some of them are going to choose to drill.
The thing is, if
they can find people.
Right.
They're going to have to be able, they're going to have to hire.
We'll talk about that in a second. But the other thing is that if prices hit $80 and $80 per barrel in Q4, so you're talking about setting your budgets going into to 2022 at $80 oil, right? And also, by the way, what's in 2022?
Midterms.
So whatever policy proposal that Biden is going to work out with this federal permitting, he almost has to decide before the end of this year because next year becomes a political issue more so than it is. So you kind of like have this window between now and the end of the year that they kind of have to make these decisions because if you go into next year and you're trying to do this, you're going to have every congressman and senator that's talking about all this stuff, and the political football will be getting kicked all over the place. So hopefully they'll get something resolved between now and then.
Yeah, I was watching a news segment this morning about like they're saying like, oh, Biden can change this about the infrastructure, and I'm like sitting here, I'm like, it's almost June.
Mm-hmm.
Like they better get on this infrastructure thing because as soon as they get to the midterms, like if I were the Democrats, I'd be sweating buckets. Like if they don't get this legislation passed, I mean, and midterms, once you get into the elections, like forget it. It's all like craziness. But if they don't get it, like if they don't win they don't win like if Republicans take Congress back, then forget it. Like there basically is nothing they can do. So
Right.
I don't know. I mean, maybe my time, maybe I'm upping their timeline. Maybe they are like, okay, well, we have to get it passed by like November. I don't know. But all I'm thinking is like how long are they going to stretch this out?
Well, so what the first part of the primaries will be in what, March of next year or April, and then you'll have the election in November.
Yeah. So I guess they have time, but like,
Well, but people will start campaigning here by the end of the year, and so
yeah,
they're going to campaign on what they did. So if they, to your point, if they did something, then they can support it. If they didn't do something, then the Republicans will come in and say, "Well, you had your time, and you
yeah,
didn't do anything, and
yeah,
you just talked about
and
it."
yeah, and yeah, I don't think that they can again campaign on we need you to reelect us because we didn't get the infrastructure bill passed.
Right. Exactly.
Besides the fact that I assume everyone's only going to care about COVID and the fallout from that, as opposed to like, did you pass an infrastructure bill? But I don't know.
EVs.
Hey, people have weird memories.
Okay. Speaking of shortages, this was an interesting headline in the lead is a little bit buried, but lack of truck drivers could lead to fuel shortage this summer. And I read that like 3 times. I'm like, wait, less truck drivers should lead to more fuel.
Right.
But it's not that kind of problem.
Yeah, it's not a real shortage.
Yeah, getting the fuel to the gas station is the problem. Which okay, but
What they really mean is fuel bottlenecks. That's
yes,
really what someone.
yes.
Yeah, Mr. ABC News headline writer. Right. You meant bottlenecks.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this is interesting because you're saying that 20 to 25%, according to national tank truck carriers, said between 20 and 25% of tank trucks are in the fleet are parked. Huh. Okay. That's startling. Like that's a lot of trucks that have been put to the side and haven't come back. Especially with just like in 2018, 2019 in Texas, they were paying these guys all kinds of money to drive trucks. Now these are specific trucks, I understand, but still, they're saying these folks have either retired or gone to different industries. And I wonder how much of these drivers are getting unemployment benefits and just sitting at the house because instead of driving all day, they're getting paid. And so, um, could we actually see gas lines long lines at the pump because the truck's not there to deliver it?
I don't know if we could see long lines at the pump, but I could definitely see it being an issue and potentially causing prices to go up a bit simply because they're not being refilled as quickly as we're accustomed to. You know, it's interesting because it's funny because at the end it says travelers shouldn't frequently top off their tanks in fear of any potential shortages. It's like, be smart when you're filling up. Keep your eye on your gas tank. If it gets to a quarter of a tank, consider going to the gas station. Like, it's stoking this idea of like, because people when they get nervous, they transfer. We're essentially what we're doing is we're transferring storage from the tank farms to people's engines. Do you really want people's engines being where the gasoline is being stored? No, you don't. But it's an interesting issue, and you'd think, I mean, it's a similar issue I think that we're seeing in a lot of other areas, which is that you know they're having trouble finding workers. Now,
Mhm.
it's
Mhm.
the process to drive a gasoline tanker is a little bit more extensive than hiring someone to like be a waitress,
Right.
or like work in a hotel. They have to be licensed to actually drive one of these things.
Mhm.
But it is, it's yeah, apparently they need special training even to haul oil. And there are driving schools that have closed. So I think we're going to see a lot of these like issues in the economy because everything depends on everything else, and things are closed and they can't just
Wait,
open up at
wait,
the same
wait,
speed.
wait, 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 wait. I'm sorry. The government told me that some businesses were essential and some were not last year, Ellen. How dare you? How dare you? I remember
I
the government
know.
told us what was and was not essential. How dare you say
Apparently, gasoline was not considered essential. Driving truck. I mean, yeah, but part of me wonders, hey, maybe it'll lead to some interesting like innovation, like extra long gasoline. I don't know. Can they like? I don't know. It's certainly not going to lead to more pipelines. That's for
no,
sure.
heavens no.
But
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 to your point, the panic thing is the problem, right? So if people, as school gets out, and and you've got more kids on the road driving because they're out of school and all this stuff, will you see more panic buying of gasoline in these areas where a truck's delayed or whatever? And people get word, and social media it spreads like, oh my gosh, and then they go panic buy. And if they would have regularly bought, they might have had to buy less or whatever, but they'd had plenty. So I don't know. We spent over a year putting the fear of God in everyone. And we just saw with the Colonial Pipeline that obviously you had legitimate shortage issues, but you also had the panic buying, which exacerbated the issue a lot faster than it had to be. And so,
well, I
you look
wonder
at,
if Colonial Pipeline has actually primed people now for this.
right.
It's going to
Yeah,
be a worse problem now because people are like, oh yeah, Colonial Pipeline, like there was no gas,
right.
even in DC and in other places where they totally could have played it cool and it wouldn't have been an issue. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a huge issue. It can clearly be solved. I mean, I would say I think that if you really want to get the economy and kind of back humming, whatever, you've got to get some of these regulations relaxed a bit, especially on like, okay, so say your driving school closed, well now you need to open a new one. Well, like let's hurry that process along.
Hmm.
Maybe it's a there's so you can't just like get a bunch of trucks and hang a shingle and be like, hey, come learn how to drive an oil tanker at
Hmm.
my
Hmm.
parking lot. You need like you need a business license, all these things. And like there are aspects of that at the local and state and federal level that could be made a lot easier. And I think that this like pandemic whatever is actually making it worse. Like if you can't get someone on the phone at city hall, well, how are you supposed to get your license to do X, Y, and Z? And people, if they really wanted the economy to like actually get back and get supply chains back, they would think to maybe deal with the actual practical issues instead of being like, let's just give everybody more checks.
Yeah, or just don't shut down the economy. That would be my suggestion.
Oh yeah, that would
Yeah.
be my suggestion too. But now that you have like,
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I know a friend of mine who's in the securities business, and he was trying to get his license renewed or set up or something last year. And so he sent a check for 25 or $100. It was an insignificant amount of money. And he sent it down to Austin. And the people at Austin were working like shifts or they weren't there or whatever it was. And so they couldn't find his check. And he was going to be like all kinds of violations because his license wasn't set up and renewed, but he had to do business because he set meetings up because like all of his business was worked around this check being cashed. And he told the person on the phone, like, I will PayPal you money personally if you just like I will pay you the money plus more. You just pay the fine, it's $25 or $100, whatever it is, please. You're like, no, we can't do that. And he's like, I'm gonna lose my license. And I think he eventually got it worked out, but it really caused his business
exactly.
to be hampered for a while for something so insignificant as a $25 check. It wasn't like it was $10,000 bond or nothing like that. It was chump change, and it was just so frustrating. So,
Exactly, but imagine how many more people are dealing with these kinds of issues
right.
that don't need to be issues. If so you see an article like this and they're like, "Oh, well why are they just getting the gasoline to the stations?" Well, there's a reason for this and it could be cleared up if people actually like wanted to deal with it, but they don't. So,
And
uh,
people and
yeah.
people have to work. And so when you say, when you do something that crushes a part of the economy, which in this case it crushed gasoline demand last year, those trucks weren't working. Either they got a stimmy, They sat at home or unemployment, or they went and found a job because they had to. And now they're like, well, I don't want to go back over here because I've got a job. I've reoriented my life. I've done all this stuff. I like this. I like this lifestyle better, whatever it is. And so, yes, so you've done all kinds of things. So, okay, let's go on to China. China's construction boom is sending CO2 emissions through the roof. Shouldn't it be to the sky? Like, isn't that how it goes? I don't know.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. God, so many bad headlines these
Yeah.
days. Come on, guys, get your.
Now, just to be fair, if this was the U.S., it'd be like oceans rise, ice glaciers melt as U.S. CO2 emissions rise. Like, just to be clear, like, it'd be far more of a dreadful headline if there's something here in the States. And this is the thing, like this, we keep coming back to this, China and their emissions and how they're handling stuff. And so, it's according to CNN, it says their Hong Kong district bureau rather, the country's CO2 emissions from fossil fuels and cement production grew 14.5% in the first quarter of 2021 compared to last year, but they're also 9% higher than were the first quarter of 2019. So it's not as if it's just a year-over-year comparison. If you go back to 2019, they're 9% higher, almost 10% higher. So they send it to the to the atmosphere, and we're over here with the climate accords and EV.
Oh yeah, we're over here being like, sell your, I don't know, not sell, destroy your ICE vehicle and buy a really expensive electric one to save the planet, or instead of it's. I think it's interesting though, because remember, like when we were in like the depths of like lockdowns, and everyone's like, China is back to normal. If we all just do what China did, we can get back to normal. And you're like, okay, hold on a second. Let's unpack where's China's GDP coming from. And yeah, they decided they were gonna, it says here their plan was to build its way out of the pandemic. And yeah, that's one way to get your GDP looking better, is for the government to say, here's a lot of money, let's build stuff.
Yeah.
And it's like, I love how Carbon Monitor, recent data from Carbon Monitor has shown an uptick in China's obviously, I don't know. Then there's another person whose last name I cannot pronounce, who works for the Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air, which says that they estimate China's carbon emissions are lower, but still consistent with Carbon Monitor's. It says the latter provides real-time estimates, while the other place considers researching annual or quarterly government data. So all that tells me is that China is also lying about its carbon emissions, right?
Well, yeah, obviously.
Yeah. So they're both lying about it and emitting a lot. It says China's construction activities led to an increase in the use of coal, which accounted for 70% of the growth emissions in the first quarter. The rest was because of growth in oil and natural gas demand. 60% of the uptick in coal uses came from the power sector. So it's not because they were like making more steel. I assume they were making steel and using coal for it, but like you can use, there are two types of coal. One you use to make steel and the other you use to make power. So they're building their coal plants. So why are we, I just like, it's so difficult to me, this idea that we are like rending ourselves to pieces to be like, let's pay a huge amount of money and retrofit all of the buildings in the United States. And China's like, we're going to build a new coal plant. And it's all global. And then they're going to be like, oh, Exxon is responsible for Hurricane Sandy damage. And you're like, no, come on. Yeah. It's like so. And then my other favorite one is how the head of the IEA is like, John Kerry is going to save us from climate disaster.
Oh, good grief. Well, the thing that's changed about China is during the Trump administration, the mainstream media really wouldn't go hard on China. Now, they're not really going hard on China now, but they're going harder. And so I do think, you've seen the Uyghurs being talked about more. They're all of a sudden the climate stuff with China is coming up more. And during the Trump administration, that really didn't get a lot of coverage because, if you aligned with Trump, you were, basically a third right supporter. And so it was kind of a, like, you can't say anything pro Trump because that's just the worst thing ever. And so now that he's gone, it feels like you can actually say stuff against the CCP, and it's really weird. I don't know. It's kind of frustrating because what's your read on that?
Yeah. It's interesting because Trump was actually really tough on China with the tariffs. So I don't know why it's suddenly. I think that's it. It wasn't okay to criticize
That's
China
the
because
thing.
Trump was criticizing China. Therefore, you had to be on the opposite. And now that Trump is gone, although the tariffs are all still there, right?
Right.
And the trade is it's all still there, but now it's okay to say that China is bad.
Right. And I didn't think, I mean, it's not that I'm saying that everything that Trump said about China I agreed with or anything. It's just that the fact that the media was so reluctant to give him any credence for anything. It was crazy. It was insane.
Yeah,
And so,
it is insane.
okay, one more story. You want to talk about Colonial or China's crackdown on Bitcoin?
Oh, let's talk about Bitcoin. Everyone wants to talk about Bitcoin.
Is okay? Question. Tinfoil hat time. Elon and the CCP are co-conspiring to pump and dump Bitcoin.
Here's the thing. Everyone is co-conspiring to pump and dump Bitcoin. Ray Dalio is probably conspiring to pump and dump Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So yeah, everyone is. Oh, without a doubt. This is like the last like market that they can easily manipulate by like putting something on Twitter.
Well, it's funny because Elon, like at some point, at what point does he lose credibility where people don't listen to what he says anymore? What else is he?
I mean, I thought that was like back when he like smoked a joint on podcast or something, or like appeared high during an earnings call, but apparently not.
Apparently not. I mean, it's really weird because, and when this came out last week, what was funny is that I think the order was either the CCP came out or one of them came out and another one. And it's like, okay, well, so is Musk kind of carrying the CCP water here because they have huge financial interest in China, and you can't downplay that when you're dealing with him. But then he comes back out and kind of backtracks on what he says, and God, like, does he go down for like some kind of securities fraud manipulation at some point? I don't want him to be clear. I'm not saying that.
I'm surprised that he didn't like a while ago when when he was like something with like Saudi Arabia or we're going private.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't he get reprimanded by the SEC at that point?
Yeah, and I thought that was funny. I didn't really think there was a problem with it, but I just, God, like man.
Yeah, well, he's just pushes the envelope, but I feel like he's the only one who can.
Well, there's definitely.
I mean, the other guy, the WeWork guy, used to push the envelope, but he met his, I don't want to say demise, but end.
Right. Well, he made like $1 billion for a failing company, so
yeah.
Okay, so here's a couple must tweets from May 13th. To be clear, I strongly believe in crypto, but it can't drive a massive increase in fossil fuel use, especially coal. It's high time there was a carbon tax. This is after I think he came, and so
obviously he wants a carbon tax. Do you know how much credit, like money, they will make? They're in the green because of carbon credit, because of the credits, because people buy offsets. Like, he would benefit so much from a carbon tax. It's like, why even bother promoting it?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing. It's like, okay, I don't know. So it's the whole deal is a little bit.
It's weird also because I think he is kind of in a difficult situation when it comes to China because of their IP, and they could very, very clearly, easily be stolen if it's not already stolen, if he has any IP, so to speak of. So I think he's in a tough situation with China in that respect. I mean, there were stories of like people with Teslas who are getting like pulled off the road just because they're Teslas, because they're in the bad column or something. But it's interesting to think about the crackdown on crypto because it's and I argued this way back, I think in the War Room newsletter, that the whole idea of crypto challenges the notion of sovereignty, of a nation's sovereignty, and no one likes to control every aspect of like their sovereignty more than, well, I was going to say China, but also Saudi Arabia is pretty like tough on that. And
well, the holder of the reserve currency, which is the U.S.
Yeah.
In this case, so.
Yeah. Well, and we're seeing stuff from Janet Yellen, and now they're saying that if you buy something worth like $10,000 or more with Bitcoin, you have to fill out IRS paperwork on it. So, and that, come on, like, who wants to fill out a form because you're gonna buy something? Like, if that doesn't like kind of scare people away from using it, which I think ends up making Bitcoin more into a commodity than a currency, because it's like oil. You don't want to actually end up with the oil. You just want to trade it and make a profit, right? Like, it would really suck to have to like take delivery of oil. Unless you're an oil tanker or you own a tank farm. But if you're like, a person sitting in your home trading oil, you really don't actually want to take that oil. But that's a kind of a different story. But, so I'm not surprised to see China cracking down on this. I'm not sure that they're actually doing it because they think it's contributing to carbon emissions.
Oh, heavens no. Well, it could be a drain on the power demand. And so they could be saying that, hey, that their grid's is kind of fragile and they don't want the excess energy being used for that. I think more to the point is that they have their own digital currency that they're wanting to get people on. And so that's probably where they're going. But the other thing to consider is, and Peter Thiel has a theory, and I haven't heard him tease it out, but he's essentially saying that China wants Bitcoin to be kind of ubiquitous. And I kind of go back and forth on that. I don't know, because I've heard some reports that China can they can get in there and manipulate the blockchain a little bit, but I don't know. It gets outside my space. But to your point, unless there is a cryptocurrency or currency that is generally accepted around the world, and it kind of happens secretly, the U.S. government will do whatever it can to keep its status as the reserve currency, and that's because that's how they control everything. So without that, they lose the power, and so I do not think that they will be giving that up lightly.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think I like your idea. I think they want to push people into the official cryptocurrency, the official Chinese cryptocurrency that they can manipulate.
Right. They can actually manipulate and monitor and shut you out and all that. Okay. Yeah. Ms. Wald, where will you be this week?
This week, I will be on investing.com and possibly also The Hill. We have to see about that. Also, for listeners who are interested, I got to take part in a really cool panel on Friday through a Canadian, I think so, the Canadian Global Affairs Institute, where we talked about the Colonial Pipeline and cybersecurity and what needs to be done in terms of cybersecurity and the energy infrastructure. And I will post a link to that. You can listen to it like a podcast and in the show notes for those who are interested. But it was really interesting, and not just for my comments, but also because they had a cybersecurity expert who did some analysis of the code and can kind of really got into what it all means. So I encourage you to take a listen.
Alrighty, and with that, we may or may not be back next week. I know we have a World Day. We haven't talked about that, so we will see. If not, we'll be back the week after, I think, for sure, and then the week after that, we're off. So, and we'll talk to everyone next week or the week after. How about that?